In this video you will learn how to use your queen to attack on one flank and prevent the opponent's counterplay on the other side of the board. We are going to study a spectacular game in which white wins using the 150 attack. The game began with the move e4, placing a pawn in the center. Black responded with g6, using the modern defense. The idea is to develop the king's bishop on the g7 square, where it will be very well placed, since it will occupy the large diagonal of dark squares and put pressure on the center. White played d4, occupying the center with his pawns. Bishop g7, developing the king's bishop and beginning to press against the opponent's pawn center. White answered knight c3, developing the queen's knight towards its natural square, where it is very well placed and reinforces control over the central squares. Black responded with d6, taking control of the e5 square and allowing the queen's bishop to develop. Knight f3, developing the king's knight and reinforcing control over the central squares. Black played knight f6, developing his king's knight and preparing to castle. White answered bishop e3, developing his queen's bishop to a good square from which he strengthens the defense of the d4 pawn and at the same time increases control over the c5 square. In this way, black c5 break will be very difficult to carry out. Black castled. White played queen d2, mobilizing his queen and preparing to castle on the long side. White's plan is to invade with his bishop on the h6 square, to eliminate the fianchetto's bishop, which is the best defender of the opposing castling, and then launch the pawns to attack to open lines on the kingside and attack against the enemy king. Black responded with c6, taking control over the d5 and b5 squares and preparing to advance the queenside pawns, with the idea of creating counterplay. Now, the most accurate move for white is to play bishop h6, with the idea of blocking the pawn on h7 and then follow with h4 and h5, to open the h-file for the attack. The bishop is going to be exchanged for the black bishop on g7 to eliminate the best defender of the opposing castling. White will be able to organize a strong attack against the enemy king. In the game, white played h4, beginning to advance with his pawns on the kingside. In the previous video we already saw how white could continue with the attack in case black makes the move h5, to stop the advance of the white pawn. In the game, black played b5, advancing with his queenside pawns, to start the counterattack in that area. White responded with a3, to take control of the b4 square and delay black's attack on the queenside. Black played knight g4, taking advantage of the weakness of the g4 square and attacking against the bishop on e3, with the idea of eliminating it, since it is an important piece in white's attack. White answered h5, continuing his attack on the kingside and contacting the first line of defense in the opponent's castling. Now the immediate threat is to capture on g6, to open the h-file for attack. Black responded by knight takes on e3, eliminating the white bishop. Queen takes e3. Now, black played queen a5, moving the queen to the queenside, with the idea of continuing with b4 and attacking in this area. White responded with h takes g6, continuing his attack on the kingside and opening the h-file for the attack. If black now played b4, the game would continue g takes f7 check and white has the advantage. For example, after rook takes f7. Now, white can continue with knight d1 or also bishop c4 and has an advantage. In the game black played h takes g6. White played queen g5. Good move that transfer the queen to the kingside, with the idea of incorporating it into the attack, and at the same time takes control over the fifth rank, so the b4 pawn is pinned and cannot advance. With this move white achieves two objectives at the same time. On the one hand, he accelerates his attack on the kingside and on the other hand, he delays the opponent's attack on the other flank. Black played e5, increasing the pressure on the d4 point and at the same time blocking the fifth rank, in order to advance with b4. White castled on the queen side, with the idea of getting out of the pin and putting his queen rook into play. Now the d4 pawn is perfectly defended. Now, it is not possible to play b4, since white responds with bishop c4 and threatens to capture on g6, with a decisive attack. For example, in case of b takes c3, queen takes g6 follows and black will not be able to avoid checkmate. And in case of, for example, knight d7, white plays d takes e5. And after knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Bishop takes e5. f4. Bishop takes c3. Queen h6, and mate is inevitable. For example, after rook d8. White plays e5, blocking the action to the opposing bishop. Black can try f5, trying to escape with the king. But after queen h8 check, the black king receives checkmate. And if black plays e takes d4. Then white responds with bishop c4 and is winning. For example. In the game, after white castled, black played rook e8. White replied d takes e5. And after d takes e5. White played knight h4, with the idea of taking the knight to the f5 square. The game continued bishop e6. Knight f5, threatening to capture the g7 bishop, which is the best defender of the opponent's castling. Now, it is not possible to capture the knight, since after g it takes f5. And takes f5. White attacks the bishop on e6 and also threatens to advance with f6 and white is winning. In the game, black played knight d7, completing the development of his minor pieces. White replied knight takes g7, eliminating the fianchetto's bishop, which is the best defender of the opponent's castling. The game continued king takes g7. f4. Now white threatens rook takes d7, followed by f takes e5. Black is completely defenseless. If black now plays b4, white responds with queen h6 check and wins. For example, now king g8 is not possible because queen h8 is checkmate. And in case of king f6, white plays a takes b4. After queen a1 check. White plays king d2. And after queen takes b2 white plays rook b1, attacking the opposing queen. After queen a3. White plays f takes e5 check and white wins in all variations. For example, after knight takes e5. Queen f4 check and the black knight is lost. And if black goes for king takes e5, then queen g5 check. King d6. Queen g3 check. And if now black plays king to e7. Then white play knight d5 check and the black queen is lost. And if instead black plays knight to e5 to defend against the check, then white play knight b5 check and the black queen is also lost. And in case of king e7, then white plays queen g5 check. And after king f8. Rook h8 check. King to g7. And queen h6 is checkmate. In the game, after f4, black played e takes f4. White replied queen h6 check. Now, of course, king g8 is not possible because queen h8 is checkmate. In the game, black played king f6. White responded with e5 check. Now, it is not possible knight takes e5, because after queen f4 check, black's knight is lost. In the game it was played. King takes e5. Queen g5 check. f5. And now, white played bishop c4, incorporating the bishop into the attack and freeing the way to put his king's rook into play. The black king is very exposed in the center and will receive checkmate in a few moves. Now, it is not possible bishop takes c4, because after rook h e1 check, bishop e2. Rook takes e2 is checkmate. In the game, after the move bishop to c4, black played bishop d5, trying to create an escape route for his king. But white played bishop takes d5, and black resigned. After c take d5. White continues rook takes d5 check and the black king receives checkmate in a few moves.